32. Hold that number, because a single sheet of paper with 32 entries on it is what turned two team bosses who genuinely get along into a public argument in front of the world's motorsport press. Here is the sequence, with no adjectives on it. At the Austrian Grand Prix at the Red Bull Ring at the end of June, Toto Wolff was asked about chassis development. He said Mercedes brings small enhancements here and there. Then he said this, to Planet F1 and other media in the paddock, that Mercedes are always a little bit surprised that Ferrari can throw these huge updates at the car in the way they do. He went further. In his opinion, he said, Ferrari need to be running out of money soon, cost cap money, because Mercedes cannot do that, simply lacking the buffer. And to Racing News 365, he added the line that actually did the damage. The only ones who are not slowing down are Ferrari. Ferrari, he said, seem to be limitless in that way. If you are watching this from outside Europe, tell me your country in the comments, because this channel now has people in places I did not expect. And I read those. Subscribe while you are down there, because the second half of this season is going to be decided in rooms like the one I am about to take you into. Now, who is Fred Vasseur? And why does his answer to that matter more than a normal team boss reply? Vasseur is not a Ferrari lifer. He ran Assart, he ran Renault, he ran Sauber, and he is one of the very few men in the paddock who has personally signed and developed drivers, who later won world championships. He and Wolff are known in the paddock to get on well away from the politics. That is the point. When two men who like each other stop speaking, the paddock notices. On the Friday of the British Grand Prix, at the FIA team principals press conference at Silverstone, Vasseur was asked a routine question about balancing upgrades against the budget cap. He did not give a routine answer. He said he found it quite ironic coming from Toto and Mercedes. Then, and these are his words, when Red Bull is developing or when Mercedes is developing, they are genius. When we are developing, we are cheating. Cheating. A team principal on the record, in an FIA press conference putting that word into the air about his own team. Nobody made him say it, he chose it. So let me put the official logic on the table and take it apart, because Wolff never used that word. Question 1. Did Wolff accuse Ferrari of anything? No, he said he was surprised, and he said they would run out of money. Both of those are opinions about arithmetic. Question 2. Then why did Vasseur hear an accusation? Because he was asked exactly that, and he answered it directly. If you think that we overshoot the cost cap, he said, for me it is going into this direction. Translated out of Vasseur's English, that is a man saying there is no third meaning available. Question 3. Was Vasseur told why Ferrari specifically got named, and not Red Bull and not McLaren? He was asked. And his answer was to send the question back down the pit lane. If you have to ask something to Toto, go to Toto and ask him why he spoke about me. Honestly, he said, I have no clue. Question 4. Have the two of them spoken since Austria? He was asked that too. He said he thought it was better to avoid to speak. And question 5, the one that gets skipped. What is a cost cap breach procedurally when it actually happens? It is not a shrug. In 2021, Red Bull were found in breach, and the outcome was a financial penalty plus a reduction in wind tunnel and computational fluid dynamics time that shaped the following seasons. That is what the word carries in this sport. That is why Vasseur reacted the way he did to a sentence that never contained it. Now hold that thought, because there is a second version of this weekend, and it belongs to Wolff. On the Saturday at Silverstone, after qualifying, Wolff was asked about the reaction. He told Sky Sports F1 that Fred is very emotional, and that if Vasseur had read his comments rather than just a headline, he would have seen it was an observation. Then he added a sentence that I want you to keep. In that case, he said, he did not mean it really. Two men, one weekend, one set of words, two entirely different accounts of what those words were. One of them heard an accusation, the other says there was never anything to hear. Read on its own, each version holds up. That is exactly what makes it worth looking at. And now the timeline moves, because this did not end at Silverstone. On the 10th of August, in the middle of the summer break, Wolff spoke to Racing News 365 again. The subject had changed. The FIA had named Red Bull's combustion engine as the benchmark, and Ferrari were unhappy about where that left them. And Wolff said, Ferrari keep whinging that they do not have the strongest engine, that they have an absolutely competitive power unit in a car designed for high downforce, and that everyone is pretty much on par. So follow the chain. In June, the complaint is that Ferrari spend too much. In August, the complaint is that Ferrari complained too much. Same man, same rival, 6 weeks apart, And in between, the man doing the complaining is leading both championships. I am not going to tell you what that adds up to. I am going to give you the number instead. Here is the arithmetic, and this is where the whole argument either survives or falls apart. 32 is the count of individual aerodynamic upgrades Ferrari had formally declared to the FIA across the opening 8 races, as published to the media and reported by ESPN at the start of July. Mercedes had declared 17 in the same window. On paper, almost double. Ferrari brought major packages in Miami and in Barcelona. Mercedes brought their one significant package in Montreal, 2 numbers on a sheet, and a $215 million spending limit sitting behind them, up from a base of $135 million the year before, with an extra $1.8 million allowed per race beyond the 21st Grand Prix of a season. On those figures alone, Wolff's observation looks reasonable, except the race went and read the same FIA declaration documents properly, and their analysis put Ferrari's actual rate of updates alongside Red Bull's and alongside Cadillac, a team building an entirely new project from nothing, which means the sheet that started this fight may not measure what everybody assumed it measures. Vasseur said as much in that same press conference, and it is the most useful thing he said all day. The FIA, he explained, asks teams to declare what they are changing as a shape on a part, not the details, so a single fundamental change counts as 1 entry. A handful of small tweaks counts as 5 or 6, and every team decides for itself how finely to slice its own paperwork. Then he started a sentence about the whole thing taking on a bit of a proportion, and he stopped. He did not finish it. In a press conference where he had answered everything else with a blade in his hand, that is the moment worth pausing on. If you were Vasseur in that room, you had 2 options and both were bad. Answer, and you spend your Silverstone weekend as the man who said cheating out loud. Say nothing, and the suggestion that Ferrari cannot afford their own car sits in every headline unchallenged going into a home crowd weekend. Which one do you pick? Like this video if you would have answered, comment if you would have stayed silent, and I will read the split out on the next one. Subscribe while you are there. Now the part where the numbers stop being about paperwork and start being about the championship. When Vasseur gave that answer at Silverstone, Ferrari were 98 points behind Mercedes in the constructors' standings after 8 rounds. By the summer break, after 11 of 23 rounds, Mercedes were on 379 and Ferrari on 307. Subtract those yourself. The gap that Wolff expected to widen, as Ferrari ran dry and Mercedes came on strong, closed by 26 points in 3 race weekends. Lewis Hamilton went into that break second in the Drivers' Championship, 50 points off Kimi Antonelli, still the only man outside Mercedes to have won a Grand Prix this year. So there is a reason for all of this that has nothing to do with anybody breaking anything, and almost nobody talks about it. Mercedes are based in England. So are 7 of the other teams on this grid. They buy from the same suppliers, hire from the same pool of engineers, and queue at the same machine shops. Ferrari are in Maranello, and inside Italy, the only outfit competing with them for that same supply chain is Racing Bulls. 2 teams competing for a market against 8 competing for another. That difference does not show up anywhere on an upgrade sheet, and it does not cost a cent of cap money, and it is the kind of structural advantage that looks like magic from the outside. Vasseur put the on-track version of that even more bluntly. After Barcelona, he said, Ferrari were at the top. After Austria, they were nowhere. And after first practice at Silverstone, when you do not know what fuel anybody else is carrying, the upgrades are magic. That is a man telling you that the sport keeps drawing conclusions from data that does not support them. And here is the strongest version of the argument against everything I have just said, because it deserves to be heard properly. Wolff may simply have been right and early. A cost cap does force a team to plan an entire season of parts before the season starts, and front-loading a car does mean less to spend later. James Vowles at Williams described exactly that pressure this year, calling it a constant struggle between what a team needs to invest and what it has to invest. And when Fernando Alonso joked that some rivals seem to have a money-printing machine at the factory, it was Lando Norris who pushed back, saying some drivers talk too much, that they have no idea, and that they are not accountants. Norris is right about that. Most of the people arguing about the cost cap this summer, including a lot of us, are not accountants. So this is where I land, and I want to be exact about it. I do not know what Toto Wolff intended in Austria. He says it was an observation. That may be entirely true. What I can show you is a pattern of two, both dated, both on the record with named outlets. In June, a rival is spending too freely. In August, the same rival is complaining too loudly. And on both occasions, the man saying it is leading both championships and would benefit if the FIA and the paddock spent their attention pointed at Maranello. That is not proof of anything. It cannot be. Nobody has produced a document, nobody has alleged a breach, and the FIA has opened nothing. But the question of who gains when a rival's spending gets discussed in public is a legitimate question, and it is one that Vasseur clearly asked himself before he opened his mouth in that room. And 32 is the whole thing in one number. 32 entries on a declaration sheet, which the race's reading of the same paperwork puts in the same territory as Red Bull and a first-year team. 32 lines that were enough to make one boss suspicious in public, enough to make the other say cheating on the record, and enough to make both of them stop speaking to each other for a fortnight. Wolff says he did not mean it really. Vasseur says he has no clue why he was named. One of those two men is telling you less than he knows. Zandvoort is next, and then Monza on the 4th to the 6th of September, where Ferrari's second engine upgrade arrives and Mercedes may take a grid penalty with Antonelli at his own home race. If Ferrari are genuinely out of money, we find out in Italy, in front of the Tifosi, in public. So tell me which one you trust less right now, and say the name. And if you have been here since we went through Hamilton's penalty run, and what Vasseur said about the censors, you already know why I do not take a single steward's number at face value anymore. That story and this one are about to meet at Monza, and that is the next video. Like it, subscribe, and I will see you there. Until the next one.